Okay, so we want to start, I took chapters 2 and 3 and kind of thinned them out and put them together. I know it looks like a lot of slides, but I don't think it's actually as long as it appears. This chapter 2 starts out talking about the John Benet Ramsey case. So that's why her face is on here. And they're talking about her case and how the crime scene was not secured, so they can't be sure of what data they actually have. Lots of people were bip-bopping through her crime scene before they found her body, so it wasn't secured at all. Oh, okay, so upon arrival at the crime scene, the first responding police officer is responsible to 1, acquire medical assistance for any injured victims. Okay, so if they're injured, they need to get medical assistance first. So when the medical personnel arrive, they're supposed to take an indirect route to get to the victim. They're not supposed to just travel the path that perhaps the suspect traveled. So they want to take an indirect route to get to them and try to avoid disturbing evidence. Okay, then the police officer should detain any witnesses and potential suspects, and statements are going to be taken from them. Then they're going to secure the crime scene, so they can use crime scene tape, rope, and cones. Okay, but the idea is they're going to seal the boundary of it off and then post guards at the point of entry and exit if that's needed. So civilians and unauthorized personnel are not supposed to go through the crime scene. Okay. The first responding officer is also supposed to call for any additional personnel needs. So it depends on the crime. So if it's a fire, they would call, the police, the fire department, the arson specialist. I mean, they're going to call who they need depending on what the crime is. Okay, now to secure the crime scene, the boundaries are like roped off with tape or cones and rope. Okay, the secured area should include where the crime took place and then the surrounding area if they think that there's some evidence in that area. Okay, so you put guards at the entrance and restrict access. Then whoever comes in and out is going to complete a detailed log of who comes in and who exits. So the names of the people and the time of their entry or exit is included in that log. So it's important that the investigators never do anything that could alter the crime scene. So they shouldn't be smoking, eating, drinking, dropping trash. They shouldn't be changing the temperature of the thermostat. I mean, anything like that. Everything has to stay the same. Okay, now, when they start searching the crime scene, the physical evidence, when they start searching through the physical evidence, it should be thorough and systematic. So this always reminds me of what, like science, it becomes very scientific, right? So they're searching exactly through in a very systematic manner. So there's different search patterns, and that depends on how big the crime scene is and where it's at and who is there and how many people you have to help. For a factual, unbiased reconstruction of the crime, the investigator should rely on his or her experience and training to not overlook any pertinent evidence. So they have to be aware of what's going on around them. Okay, so, and you guys know this, physical evidence could be anything from something really gigantic, okay, to a microscopic article. Okay, the walkthrough. So the walkthrough is defined as the initial survey of the crime scene by the lead investigator. And the goal is to gain an overview of the scene and come up with a plan to try to process it. So that's called the walkthrough. So, obvious items of evidence are located and documented. So that makes it easy, right? Things that jump up at you should be documented. And then they're going to look at the scene, the crime scene and start recording what the conditions are. So they're going to pay attention to the items or the conditions that suggest the timing of the incident and things that look like they don't belong. So like things like a newspaper or a clock or whatever, they're going to suggest the timing. Then they're also looking at things that don't look like they should actually be there. Okay, so the crime scene can be broken down into two components, two parts. So the primary crime scene, so that's where the initial crime occurred. So an example of that would be the house in which the murder occurred. And then the secondary crime scene is like the location where events after the initial crime occurred. So then they took the body and they buried it in a shallow grave. Okay, so primary and secondary. So primary would be where they were murdered, and the secondary might be where the body was dropped off. Okay, so you can infer whether the crime scene is primary or secondary by what evidence is actually there. And you guys can think of examples, right? If there's a body and there's no blood, right? So there's no blood, everything is clean, but you can see where the wounds are on the body, then it probably wasn't killed there. But then there's another location, which would be the primary spot that's full of blood. Okay, now the command center is the point where everything is going to operate from. So investigators are going to receive their tasks from the lead investigator. They're going to store their equipment at the command center. They're going to meet at the command center. And then investigators and law enforcement personnel will communicate with other people at the crime scenes. Okay, now how would you search? So I think there's 5 different ways that you can conduct a search. So the first one is line and strip search pattern. So what happens is maybe one or two, so this one or two people start and they go to the crime scene and they walk from one boundary all the way across to the exit boundary. And then they'll kind of loop around and come back across. My old advisor used to call this as the ox plows. So if you think about a farmer plowing a field, you would start at one end, go across, and then you turn around and go back across, and then back across, and back across. So that could be one or two people doing that. Okay, now a grid is more like a piece of graph paper. So it's 2 or more investigators. They form a grid, and so they go straight across the grid, and where they walk is going to overlap. So I guess you can think of it as graph paper. So they're going to go the way the ox plows, okay, or a tractor would go, and then they're going to go perpendicular to it as well. So they're overlapping themselves. So it's more like graph paper. So it's got lots of little squares on it. Okay, now a spiral search is they start in the middle and they spiral outward. Okay, so it could go either way. So they could go from out and spiral into the crime scene, or they could go in and spiral out. So they could go either direction. So spiral search that one. Okay, now a quadrant. So a quadrant is 4, or they call it a zone. So the crime scene is divided into these zones. Okay, so it could be 4 pieces, and then an investigator is assigned to go through each zone. Okay, then the next thing is vehicle searches. So investigators can look at the inside or the outside of the vehicle, so the interior and the exterior. Then the vehicle may even be searched. It could be searched at the crime scene, or it could be put on a trailer and towed to the crime lab garage. Okay, night searches. Typically, they try to avoid outdoor or dark indoor crime scene searches, so they don't want to do that because it's going to be hard to see. So, if possible, the crime scene is secured and guarded until the morning. Okay, now when they leave the crime scene, what's going to happen is the experienced lead investigator decides when they've got everything, and then they do a final survey to make sure that they've got everything and they've picked up all their equipment, and then they leave and the crime scene is released to the proper authorities, so whoever needs it. Okay, now there's way more details, well, not way more, but some more details in the book. Not a ton. Okay, so this is the beginning of chapter 3. So chapter 3 covers recording the crime scene. So how do you document what you're doing while you're there? So there's 3 things that you use. So photography, sketches, and notes. Okay, so if everything is ideal, you should have all 3. However, sometimes there's not enough money or people to use photography at every crime scene. Okay, so note-taking begins when the investigator is first contacted and asked to come to the crime scene. That's when they're going to start taking notes. Okay, the notes contain a personnel log, and in that personnel log, they're going to have all their observations that they're making, the times the observations were made. They should have the identity of the person who contacted the investigator, the time of contact and the arrival, the preliminary case information, so what they told you about it, and then who's present when they get there. Okay, the notes are to be taken in a uniform layout, so it should make sense. And this is where it always reminds me of a science notebook. So they should be taken concurrently, so as you're doing it, you're supposed to be making the observations and writing them down. The notes are supposed to be written in a bound notebook, and they're supposed to be in blue or black ink. And I know in the science world there have even been studies done that tell you what ink is mostly indelible. Okay, it won't be destroyed. Okay, the idea behind the bound notebook is that pages can't be taken out without somebody figuring it out or noting. So things need to be numbered and signed so you know it's consistent, and then it can be admitted as evidence. Okay, so photographs taken at the crime scene are going to show what it looks like, the layout, how the evidence is spread out. Okay, so collected and uncollected evidence. It'll show the point of view of the victims, the suspects, and the witnesses, and the original condition of the evidence when they first found it at the scene. Okay, so nowadays everything is digital photography. So digital photography is awesome because you can make sure that you have a good picture right after you take it, so you don't have to worry as much about making sure that the picture is any good when you had film. And some of you guys have never experienced that, but if you've ever used film in a camera, you can take pictures and think they're great, and then when you get the film developed, you can't tell anything. Okay, now drawbacks of digital crime scene photography is that the images could be manipulated, and then they might not show an accurate depiction of the crime scene. So images are typically compressed to store the data. So there's 2 categories of compression. So one is called lossy and the other one is lossless. So lossy compression, when it condenses the files, it gets rid of some image information. So if you get rid of the information, you can't get it back. It's gone. However, if you compress with this lossless, okay, you can store the information in a smaller space, but all the information is still there, so someone else could pull it up on a computer and look at it. So you don't lose any information. So no important image information is lost. Okay, now, law enforcement agencies. So how do you, if things can be edited and changed around, how do you ensure that your images haven't been edited? So one of the things is they develop standard operating procedures, and you have to follow them. If you deviate from them, you write it down. The information is going to be saved to a writable disk with lossless compression. Okay, so you don't use something that's rewritable. It has to be just writable. Okay, you can save the enhanced or altered images as a separate files. So you have original and you have altered. You keep a detailed and accurate photography log. So you write down what you're taking pictures of so you can go back to it. And then you submit testimony from the crime scene photographer as to the accuracy of the images. So there's one person who's doing it, and they're going to I guess, validate that that's what they're doing. Okay, now there's a whole bunch in here, or several pages in here, describing how do you use the cameras and what the different things say on them. And we're not going to go into that. We have whole photography classes here that you could take. So the type of camera that is used is called DSLR, so digital single lens reflex camera. They have different kinds of lenses. So there are macro lenses for taking small images or pictures of small things. There are wide angle lenses. And these cameras also have a whole bunch of automatic settings. The book talks about all the different f-stops and different photography terms, but we're not going to go over all of that. And the book also recommends using a tripod to stabilize the camera. Okay, now the crime scene photography log. So a detailed log of each photograph taken at the crime scene is kept by the photographer. So the top of the log form includes the case number, the type of scene, the date, the location of the scene, description of the camera and the lenses being used, and who the photographer is and what their title is. So case number, type of scene, date, the location, what kind of camera, and who the photographer was. Okay, so for each photograph, the log records the date and time the photograph was taken, the location of the picture, okay, the settings of the camera, the lighting that was used, and then a brief description of the subject of the picture. Okay, crime scene photographs record the area where the crime actually took place, and then the adjacent areas where important things could have happened. Okay, so the crime scene needs to be unaltered when you photograph it. So there is a logical succession of images that is always used. So the first thing is you do the big picture, so the overall scene first, and then work down to individual pieces of evidence. So the idea is the jurors that are at the trial can easily relate the individual pieces of evidence back to the big picture. So you start out with the big picture and then work your way down, kind of maybe like a pyramid, upside down pyramid. Okay, now each crime scene should have a minimum of 4 photographs. So an overview photograph, a medium range photograph, a close-up photograph, and a close-up photograph with a scale. Okay, so overview, medium range, close-up of the crime, and then the close-up with a scale. So a scale is going to show you like a ruler, so you can tell how big something actually is. So overview photographs of the entire scene and surrounding area, including points of exit and entry, are taken first. Okay, so we've talked about that. So take the big picture first. Okay, so they can be taken from the outside borders of the scene and from different angles. So if the crime scene includes a body, the photographs have to show the body's position and relative location compared to the whole scene, so you can kind of get a feel for what's going on. Okay, now Overview photographs of the entire scene and surrounding area, including points of entry and exit. Okay, so usually you include something that they call it a visual tag. So a visual tag is an object that's in several of the photos, and it's going to help you piece the scene together. So maybe there's a coffee mug, so you make sure the coffee mug is in all the photos, and it'll help you kind of figure out how it all works together, or a door or something like that. Okay, the book has a picture of it has a series of pictures, and the first picture is an overview of the scene. So the big overview, it looks like an entryway because it has stairs on the right side. It has a door leading into a room that looks like a bedroom with a bed. There is like a footstool with laundry on it. There's a wall with a picture and a stand with a vase. And then there's like a funky stone pattern on the wall. So it's not like it's just plain old white paint. So that's the big overview. So it says the sequence begins with the overview photograph of the entry to the victim's bedroom showing evidence markers in place. So the evidence markers are these little cones that are orange with numbers on them. Okay, now there's a mid-range photograph where it shows the evidence marker beside a cartridge case. Okay, so it's a little tiny, in this picture it looks like it's up beside the door going into the bedroom. There's a cartridge case for a gun, and it's beside an evidence marker, which is an orange cone that says number 2. Okay, now the sequence of crime scene photographs show this is a close-up. So there's a close-up of the cartridge, and there's a ruler beside the cartridge so that you can get some scale. So you can see how big the cartridge is. And you can see the door to the bedroom, and once again you can see the evidence marker. Okay, so we have the overview pictures, we have medium range pictures. So you want to have the evidence markers in place when you take those to show the spatial relationship between and among pieces of evidence. And then the medium range photographs show the layout of smaller significant areas of the crime scene. So they include at least one photograph of the center of the scene. Okay, and in violent crimes, this usually includes the site where the victim was found and the area around that. Okay, close-up photographs are taken last. Okay, they're taken 90-degree angle to the object with and without evidence marker and scales. Scales should be placed as close to the evidence as possible without disturbing it. Okay, so close-up photographs are taken after the body's moved, then the surface underneath the body should be photographed. Okay, night photography is considered special crime scene photography, so you might need external lighting. And then indoor photography, you could take pictures of everything. So it includes the points of entry, the neighborhood, the walls, the floors. Okay, so then outdoor photography requires location of photographs to be recorded by a global positioning device, or you could have measurements from landmarks. And outdoor photography could also include aerial photographs, depending on what the crime is. Okay, now arson photography, you need to take pictures of the point of the fire's origin, and then you have to use special equipment or techniques to provide contrast in the photographs of where there's actually burn spots, okay, where it's charred. Okay, some with an arson, they also include photographs of the crowd outside the scene because arsonists commonly return to the scene. in sexual assault photography, you have to have photographs of the wounds and the clothing, but you need to also be careful and respectful of the victim. Okay, now impression photography. So if you're taking a picture of like a tire track or a footprint or something, you need to use oblique lighting, and that's going to show the details. And you should use a scale so that you can actually compare the size of the tire track or the size of the footprint. So you need a 1-to-1 scale so you can figure out what's exactly going on. Okay, now blood stain photography. You need to photograph the pertinent stains and determined area of convergence or the area of origin. So you want to look at where the blood comes from and the areas that are stained from the blood. So the blood stains can be treated with luminol and photographed in darkness if you need to demonstrate that it is actually blood. Okay, now latent fingerprint photography. So if you're taking pictures of fingerprints, you want to have a 1-to-1 scale so you can determine the size. And there's a special camera for fingerprints. It's got an adapter on it so that you can see the images better. You can't just do it with a regular camera. Okay, now you can videotape a crime scene and narrate it, but if you do that, you still have to include the overview, the medium range, and the close-up images, and then you can narrate it, and that will combine the video and like the photography and the notes. But one thing, lots of times they say that you can capture images from the video to get photography, like to get photographs, but that's hard to do. Usually the images aren't very good, so they recommend if you videotape something, then you need to take photographs as well. They also say that it's important when you're narrating the crime scene that only one person is narrating and there's not a lot of other noise going on, so you can make sure that you can hear everything. Okay, now sketches. Crime scene sketches. Okay, so the idea is they're going to show the layout of the crime scene. They're going to show the relationship in space of all the significant items and the features. Okay, so they're going to clarify objects and features that are already described in the notes or shown in the photographs. So it's going to help put everything together. It should complement the notes and the photographs. Okay, so crime scene sketches show measurements and hopefully the topography. So like, is there a hill or is it going down or what's going on if it's an outdoor scene. Okay, the sketches should depict possible paths of entry, exit, and movement. Okay, so a rough sketch is created at the crime scene, but it might not be pretty, but it has an accurate depiction of the dimensions of the scene. So you have to use like a tape measure, and it shows the location of all pertinent objects and features. So you might have a key. So I'll show you in a picture here in a minute. Okay, so the book has a picture of a rough crime scene sketch. So they have to include a title block, and on the title block is going to have the information on the case. So you have the case number, you have the crime scene, you have the person doing the sketch, the date, okay, the time. You're going to have legends to describe the object, and then on the picture you're going to have the objects drawn out, okay, and you might label them with the legend. And then with the legend, then you're going to say what it was. So you might say, oh, it's the table, or it's a bullet hole, or whatever. You should have a compass showing north, so you know which way is north. And then it should also include the person who's doing the sketch, so you know where in the room the sketch person is standing. Okay, it's hard to make a rough sketch to scale, but you can on it label what dimensions are on it. You can label the dimensions on it. So the picture that's in the book, it's a rectangle, and in the middle there's a couch. Okay, and then there's a measurement that says the couch is 7 feet 4 inches from the wall. And there's a desk with a phone. There's a lamp and a table and fireplace. And you can kind of put what the room looks like all together. Okay, now the finished crime scene sketch is created from the rough sketch, but it's drawn to scale. And lots of times they use a program called computer aided drafting. So that's CAD. And we also have like whole classes on CAD. So CAD allows you to create, you could make a three-dimensional image of the sketch if you wanted to. But it's the same thing, it's just made with software, so everything is nice and square and the distances are more accurate. So it's to scale. It's got to have the same label on the top.